never wrote. We had words cause the best supposed to clash to the top.
This is a lyric from rapper Nas discussing his short beef with Tupac, a beef that wasn't really spurred on by much. There was no real animosity between the two, but describing it as the natural collision of two greats at the top of a mountain that can only fit one. And it's how I would describe the Georgia and Alabama rivalry. So far in this series, as many have pointed out, it's not really a rivalry. They were only scheduled to play each other in the regular season a single time during the 6 years we've looked at, and despite that, they have faced off against each other 5 times, 4 of which representing 2 SEC championships and 2 national championships, where the fallout of those national championships were felt nationwide. You see, just like after Alabama's tear of the national championships in the early 2010s conveniently resulted in the playoff starting, similarly, when the playoff committee suddenly had no reason but to allow 2 SEC teams into the playoff format twice in 4 years, they conveniently started to brew up a 12-team playoff format that we now see today. And not only that, but you also had what these 2 teams meant to college football. From 2008 to 2017, no team in the SEC had consistently stood up to Alabama, and outside of Clemson from 2015 to 2018, no team had stood up to their consistency and ability to reload and keep finding ways to be elite. Heck, even Clemson in recent years showed that that wasn't a sustainable thing to do. Georgia, for the first time in Saban's era, represented a change. They were the Rocky in this fight. Yes, they kept losing, but yes, they kept fighting, and in the end, with a late pick from Bryce Young, it was them who were delivering the knockout blow to the Crimson Tide. Not just ending that game, but effectively ending an era for Alabama football. Because for the first time in a long time, 2022 brought forth a new age. It was now the Georgia Bulldogs SEC. They'd open up against number 11 Oregon and walk away sweatless with clean jerseys as the scoreboard sat 49-3. Samford and South Carolina poised no chance as Kent State put up more points than both of these teams combined. Missouri would put up a bit of a fight before Auburn, Vanderbilt, Florida would absolutely put up no fight at all, with a combined score of 30 points across those 3 games compared to Georgia's 139 points, before Tennessee, currently holding the crown of number 1, would march into Athens to simply crown the new king, as their dynamic offense would be butchered under the thumb of Kirby Smart's now infamous defense. It was clear Georgia was the team to beat this year, and as Mississippi State, Kentucky, and Tech all found out, it wasn't going to happen, as they strolled to the SEC championship and in the blink of an eye were up 35-10 at half, where despite a decent second half attempt, would still pull off a dominant victory. Meanwhile, Alabama was beginning to look like a shell of themselves. They were barely able to sneak past Texas and Texas A&M, and though they were still ranked number 1 before Tennessee would rock their world with a last-second ugly field goal to win the game, 2 weeks later LSU would fight them tooth and nail and pull off a win over the Tide in a gritty double overtime game, knocking them out of any postseason conversation, despite them easily having one of the harder schedules this year, as they would argue that even with 2 losses, they should be considered over a team like TCU. And while that noise was quieted when TCU pulled off one of the most unexpected wins against Michigan, oh man, if you could have been on Twitter the day that Georgia dropped a deuce on TCU's head so bad that we still feel the remnants of that game when any SEC fans talks about their supposed supremacy over any of the other conferences. But what few fail to realize is that this rivalry, the one between Alabama and Georgia, is what spurred on that entire debate. Because while we can argue about how good the SEC was from 2017 to 2022, these 2 teams from one conference seem to always represent the best of what college football had to offer. And the games were electric because of it. But also because of that, the epilogue of their fallout has been interesting. You see, in 2023, both of these teams, as hungry as ever, with as much to prove as ever, would go on a tear. Georgia coming off back-to-back national championships, not losing a game since their SEC championship championship 2 years ago against Alabama would miss no marks. It wasn't until week 5 against Auburn that they even had a one-score game, and they would then take down a number 20 ranked Kentucky, dominate Vanderbilt and Florida before having a tough stretch against Missouri, who would put up a good fight, but ultimately never be able to turn the corner, never holding a lead for more than a single drive, as 2 late interceptions sealed their fate. And then, with that being too close for comfort, they tightened up against Ole Miss, who would get thwacked 52-17. Tennessee would fall 38-10 before beating Georgia Tech, who, to be fair, was sneakily good this year in a game that came down to a failed onside kick attempt. Georgia, now enjoying their time on top, would have to go to the SEC championship to face down, you guessed it, the Crimson Tide, who, for what it's worth, were not the top dogs we knew and hated. Yes, they dominated Middle Tennessee, but Texas would beat them by 10 points. South Florida would hold them to 17 points, while Ole Miss and Mississippi State would both go down relatively easily. Texas A&M and Arkansas would be close one-score affairs before the rest of their season would be something they could pretty easily coast through, except for, of course, Auburn, who took them down to the wire, requiring both a fumble on a punt return as well as scoring a touchdown on 4th and 31 to just barely sneak into that SEC championship game on the back of some lucky breaks. This couldn't have been more of Georgia's game to win, and yet, at the end of a gritty half of football, Georgia had their one and only score coming off of their opening drive, while Alabama drove the length of the field twice, had 2 touchdowns, and a field goal to show for it. They would both punt back and forth in the second half before Georgia would get their own field goal, but getting the ball back with a chance to take the lead, Beck would turn it over and put the Tide in the red zone to set them up for a field goal of their own. Georgia would try to fight back. They would return a punt to the 35 and immediately score, but Bama was seeing red. So 9 plays and 75 yards later, they would be up by 10 again, and despite Georgia's best efforts with a score with a little over 2 minutes left, Alabama knew exactly what to do with their time. They put the plastic bag over Georgia's head and pulled the strings, as in nothing but pure shock. Georgia didn't just lose to Alabama, but with all this SEC bias hot in the news,
the Georgia Bulldogs. So after consecutive national championships, Georgia will not compete in the playoff, and this is also the first time that the team that was number 1 in the penultimate rankings has fallen completely out of the college football playoff.
They were kicked out of the playoffs and now had to go take on Florida State, where we would see a new trend, and that was Alabama looking pretty flat after playing Georgia. Maybe they had just been too conditioned by all the bright lights that Georgia brought, but against Michigan, they didn't look great at all, which is saying something as they took the Wolverines to an overtime. But I mean, from constant errant snaps and offensive misfires, it really said more about the Wolverines that it took them all the way to overtime to win this game, as on the final play, Alabama went back to that design quarterback run, not too unlike what they did against their game in Georgia in 2018, but they got stuffed, while Georgia would go and do to their 2023 postseason opponent exactly what they did to their 2022 postseason opponent, as Florida State was the sacrificial lamb, showing why we absolutely needed more teams in the playoffs. But perhaps the biggest talking point of all of this wasn't Alabama's way of stunning the Dogs one more time, but the fact that after the season, legendary head coach Nick Saban retired, and his last national championship appearance resulted in a loss to Georgia, with many thinking maybe if he had won that one, he would have rode off into the sunset of a future Hall of Fame, but instead, after a defeat at the hands of Michigan in the semifinals and the ever-shifting sands of college football's landscape sinking beneath his feet, he decided that that was his time to let go. Leading us to 2024, where for the first time in a long time, these two behemoths were scheduled to play each other early in the season. And we knew what it was setting up to be. Both teams would tear through their schedules, looking to get as high up in the rankings as possible before seeing each other. Alabama, now led by Coach DeBoer, won previously in the national championship with the Huskies, wasn't missing a beat. Western Kentucky would fall 66-0 as Alabama's fans' fear of a new coach began to melt away. They then handily beat South Florida, and if you casually ignore the fact that it was a 1-point game at the start of the fourth, you could be confident, especially with their win against Wisconsin, who would fall 42-10, as it appeared that DeBoer wasn't going to miss anything going into Georgia week. Now 3-0 and ranked number 4, while Georgia made a message out of a top 20 Clemson Tiger team before throttling destroying Tennessee Tech and barely beating Kentucky by 1 point. But that still made this another matchup where both teams were in the top 5, and we just knew whoever came out on top was going to be crowned the best team in the country, and we got maybe our best game to date, as Alabama came out treating Georgia's neck like a gas pedal because they had their foot on it pressed hard. Touchdown tied, punt Georgia, touchdown tied, interception Georgia, touchdown tied, punt Georgia, touchdown tied. If you blinked, if you took a piss break, if you checked your watch, you probably missed the Alabama score, as with 12:32 left in the first half, it was 28-0. Now Carson Beck would finally settle down a little bit and move the ball downfield and score, but Bama was looking to do it again, moving the ball, getting across the 50, but on a 4th and 1, they try to show their power and go for it, but get stuffed. Oh yeah, now Georgia was about to, gosh dang it, they threw it away to Alabama, who was definitely going to, oh my gosh, Alabama threw it right back. So now, maybe Georgia has it, oh my goodness, Carson Beck, it's a safety. So in the wildest of circumstances, the half ends in a shocking, jaw-dropping 30-7 score. But then it would happen. The second half Bulldogs were coming alive. They forced the punt and drive 80 yards as Carson Beck began to actually look decent, finding the end zone and cutting it down to a 2-score game. Then they would be able to hold Alabama to a field goal before unfortunately fumbling it away. But their defense locked in. They held tight and kept Alabama to a punt, where they then put together scoring drive number 3 to be back within 2 scores. And not only that, but on 3rd and 11, Milroe looks for Ryan Williams but can't find him, forcing another punt, as it seemed like Georgia's offensive coordinator was in the avatar state. 2 passes covered 70 yards to set them up to plunge the ball into the end zone before once again Bama would spin their wheels and be forced to punt, only up 1 score. So Carson Beck steps back, 1 pump fake, and in shades of 2nd and 26 would find Dylan Bell deep on the left side of the field, where the ball is slightly underthrown but catchable, and through a spin move he shakes a defender and scores. Surely this will be the 50-plus yard 1-play lead-changing touchdown pass involving spinning through 2 defenders that everybody remembers from this game, right? Georgia overcoming a 28-point deficit and beating Alabama.
And the catch is made. It's Ryan Williams, still spinning free. Touchdown Alabama, they answer in 1 play.
Unbelievable. This team is just cursed. Georgia is simply cursed. If anything makes their 1 win over the Tide in the last decade more impressive, it's this moment, as it becomes increasingly clear that they didn't just beat the Tide, but defied God. But in Beck's final drive, his one moment to shine and defy God's will once again, he underthrows it on back-to-back plays, and the second time it gets picked. Now, normally, this is where the video would end, but I just want to put a neat little bow on this. Yes, like I said, this isn't a traditional rivalry, but since 2017, these teams have played each other 7 times, twice in the national championship, 3 times in the SEC championship, and 2 regular season games, still being on the national stage as they've been top 5 teams in both of those games. In fact, every time they've played, the crown for the best team in the country has effectively been on the line, either directly in a national championship, indirectly in a shot to go to the playoffs, or in spirit, as both times they played in the regular season, the winning team would eventually go on to be crowned number 1 in the AP polls. And every single one of those games across the past 7 years has been absolutely must-watch football. Heck, even if you go back to 2020 when Georgia lost by 17, if you watched that game, you knew that until Bennett threw that pick in easy scoring range with just a little over 2.5 minutes in the third, where Bama would use that to buffer their lead, this was a close and tight ball game against an Alabama team that didn't have a close and tight ball game all year. And no other 2 teams have given us such good football in every single matchup as these 2. The storylines, Tua's comeback, to Jalen Hurts stepping back up, to Georgia's eventual win in the national championship over their boogeyman, to these 2 teams changing the landscape of college football, effectively proving that we need a 12-team playoff. This storyline is why I made this video, and why I will always say that this is one of the greatest rivalries of all time.
It's Ryan Williams, still spinning free. Touchdown Alabama, they answer in 1 play.